It was 7:04 p.m. when the clock on my Volkswagen's dashboard froze. I didn't notice it right away, not until the silence settled thicker than it should have. I had just pulled into an old, unlisted campground off Highway 395, somewhere between Lone Pine and the shadow of the Sierra Nevada. The light was slipping fast, the kind of orange dusk that makes even ordinary trees look unfamiliar. My van's engine gave its usual sigh as I parked under a cluster of pines that leaned slightly east, like they'd been pushed that way by the wind for decades. I remember thinking how perfect the spot was. Flat ground, quiet air, no other campers in sight. It felt private, almost sacred. I didn't realize then that empty would become the scariest part of that evening. I was 34, running from burnout and noise, trying to reconnect with what had always centered me. Open roads, old Volkswagens, and the quiet hum of nature. I'd done this before, months of camping, waking to fog and coffee, finding small towns that hadn't changed in 50 years. But that night, something felt slightly wrong. The air was cool but heavy, like static pressing down on the skin. The forest didn't move. Even the crickets hesitated. I left the van door open as I unpacked, half listening for life, any rustle, any faraway hum. But the only sound was my own breath and the ticking of the van's cooling engine. I walked a few yards toward a rusted signpost I'd noticed near the entrance. It had no lettering left, just the faint ghost of words bleached away by time. Behind it, a trail wound into the darkening woods, its path swallowed by pine needles and shadow. I remember thinking I'd hike it in the morning, but as I turned back toward my van, I saw it. The dashboard clock glowing faintly through the windshield. 7:04. When I opened the driver's door, the radio crackled even though I'd turned it off. Not music, just a soft pulse like breath caught in static. I unplugged everything, turned the dial, nothing changed. It wasn't loud enough to be frightening yet, but it was wrong. My Volkswagen had always been reliable, a 1979 Westphalia I'd rebuilt with my own hands. It wasn't supposed to hum like that. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. I made soup on the small stove inside the van, the smell of tomatoes mixing with the faint metallic scent of the old heater coils. The air outside had gone utterly still. When I opened the door to dump the soup can, I noticed something strange. The van's headlights, though switched off, reflected faintly on the trees ahead. A shimmer, like the forest was holding light that wasn't there. I shut the door and laughed under my breath. It was probably the altitude, or exhaustion. I'd driven 10 hours straight, but even as I tried to sleep, I couldn't shake that light. I turned over, checked my phone, no signal, no time update. 7:04. I set it beside me and closed my eyes, telling myself I'd reset everything in the morning. But morning didn't come. When I woke, it was still dusk. The same faint orange horizon through the trees, the same still air, the same 7:04 on every clock. Dashboard, phone, watch. My stomach dropped as the realization clicked. Time wasn't moving. The forest was holding its breath. I stepped outside, barefoot on the cold earth. The smell of pine was strong, almost sour, like sap gone bad. My breath clouded, even though it shouldn't have been that cold. The sun, or whatever passed for it, hung motionless between the trees. I walked a few steps toward the trail, half expecting to find other campers or a ranger station, but the deeper I looked, the more the world folded in on itself. Every direction felt like the same view, same slope, same rock, same leaning tree. Back in the van, the radio had stopped humming. In its place was a faint, rhythmic knocking from somewhere outside. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. I stood still, heart pounding, trying to locate it. It wasn't woodpeckers. It wasn't wind. It came from the side of the van, low to the ground. I forced myself to open the door, flashlight in hand. Nothing but pine needles, no footprints, no animal tracks. But the knocking came again, this time from the opposite side, closer to the back. I spun around, light trembling in my hand, and that's when I saw it. Not a person. Not an animal. Just an outline. Something pale, like the afterimage left when you stare at headlights too long. It shifted between the trees, not moving like it walked, but like it was flickering from one place to another. I blinked, and it was gone. I slammed the van door shut and locked it, though I knew that meant nothing in the middle of nowhere. I sat there breathing hard, every sound amplified, the tick of cooling metal, the faint wind against glass. I told myself I was hallucinating. Maybe carbon monoxide, maybe exhaustion. I cracked the windows and waited for the sky to change. It didn't. It stayed 7:04. After a while, I noticed something else. My van's battery light was on, though I hadn't touched the ignition. The headlights flickered once, twice, then held steady, not illuminating anything, just glowing against a world that refused to move. I reached for the key, and as I did, I saw movement again, this time reflected in the windshield. It was me, or something shaped like me, standing just outside the van's open door. But I hadn't opened it. The reflection's face was too still, its eyes too dark. And yet, for a split second, I thought I recognized it. Tired eyes, the same jacket I was wearing, but older somehow. Weathered. I spun around. The door was closed. The air was empty. I don't remember falling asleep. I must have blacked out, because when I woke again, my head was pounding and my hands were numb. The dashboard still said 7:04, but now the forest smelled different. Burnt, almost. A faint char, like someone had lit something deep in the woods. I stepped outside and the ground felt warmer underfoot, the air thicker. I followed the scent, past the leaning pines and down a shallow slope until I saw a faint orange glow in the distance. Fire, I thought, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't fire. It was my own van. The Volkswagen sat there exactly as I'd left it, except I was standing 50 yards away from where I thought I'd parked. My footprints led straight to where it should have been, but there were two vans now. One dark and still, the other flickering faintly like heat rising from pavement. The glowing one shimmered as if underwater, its shape dissolving each time I tried to focus. I took one step closer and heard a voice. Not loud, not clear, just a whisper through static. "You should have left." I froze. The sound wasn't coming from the van, it came from inside my own head, pulsing behind my ears. My vision blurred, and suddenly I was standing right next to the flickering van. Its windows were black, but something inside moved, slowly, rhythmically, as if breathing. I raised my hand toward the glass. The moment my fingers touched it, everything went white. When I came to, I was back in my van. The soupkin lay spilled on the floor, the stove cold. The air was silent again, but my skin burned where I'd touched the glass. I checked the dashboard, still 7:04. That's when I realized what it meant. It wasn't a time, it was a loop. 7:04 wasn't when the day ended, it was when it never ended again. I stumbled outside, gasping, heart hammering. The trees bent slightly as if something heavy moved between them. I could hear whispers now, faint and overlapping like radio stations bleeding into each other. "Stay, stay," they murmured. I ran toward the trail, desperate for any break in the pattern, any sign of the road. But every turn brought me back to the same clearing, the same van, the same still air. I screamed until my throat tore, but even the echo refused to move. That was when I realized what the voice had meant. I had already stayed. I don't know how long I wandered after that. Days, maybe, or minutes. Every time I tried to leave, the light shifted only slightly, like the world was pretending to change. I'd walk north until the van vanished behind me, then see its outline ahead once more. Each return brought small differences. An extra dent on the door, a deeper burn on my skin, a faint smear of handprints on the glass from the inside. And through it all, the same clock glowed faintly in the dashboard, 7:04. At some point, I stopped trying to mark time. I tore pages from my notebook, scratching desperate notes, each one ending the same way. 7:4. Still. I taped them to the steering wheel, the fridge door, the inside of the window. The paper grew damp, then brittle, then disappeared altogether. Sometimes I'd wake and find the notes rewritten, my handwriting slightly off. The words would be the same, but the letters slanted backward as if someone had been trying to mimic me. Food ran out first, then water. The only thing that never changed was the weight in the air. The heavy electric stillness pressing against my chest like a warning. I tried starting the van once. The ignition clicked but never turned over. Then, from the radio, that faint static returned, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. Stay, stay, stay. Each word lingered like breath, fogging a mirror. I started to wonder if I'd died out there, if the van and I had become ghosts replaying the same hour forever. The thought should have terrified me, but strangely, it didn't. I was numb, floating between fear and resignation. It wasn't until I heard footsteps outside that the panic returned. They were slow, deliberate, circling the van. Not heavy, not animal, human. I pressed my ear to the metal wall, heart pounding so hard I could feel it echo through the van's frame. The steps stopped right outside the sliding door. Then came 3 knocks. I froze. I couldn't breathe. For a moment I thought maybe I'd imagined it, but then 3 more knocks, perfectly spaced. The same rhythm I'd heard before. I reached for the flashlight, my hand trembling. The beam flickered to life, catching the condensation on the windows. I wanted to call out, but my voice wouldn't come. The air outside felt thick, like the world was holding itself still, waiting for me to decide what came next. Finally, I slid the door open. No one. Nothing. Just trees stretching endlessly into the same unmoving twilight. But the ground, there were footprints. Bare, human, leading away from the van into the woods. And they were fresh. I followed them. I don't know why. Maybe because I couldn't stand the silence anymore, or because some small, desperate part of me thought there might be another person trapped here too. The prints led me past the rusted signpost, deeper down the trail. The further I went, the more the forest began to shimmer. It was subtle at first, the outlines of branches bending like reflections in water. Then the air grew warm, pulsing faintly, and I realized the shimmer wasn't in the air. It was in me. The prints ended abruptly in a clearing I'd never seen before. In the middle stood a second van, another Volkswagen Westfalia, pale blue, same year, same rust on the left fender. I laughed out loud, a sharp, broken sound. My knees nearly buckled as I stepped closer because on the back window, taped from the inside, was a note. My note. 7:04. Still. I staggered backward. The van's headlights flicked on, even though there was no one inside. My own reflection stared back at me in the windshield, but it wasn't mimicking me this time. It was smiling. Slowly, deliberately. And then from behind me, a voice said, "You finally made it." I spun around, light shaking in my hand. A man stood there, maybe in his 50s. His face was weathered, his eyes tired but kind. I should have felt relief, but something in me screamed to run. His clothes were faded, sun-bleached. His hands were covered in grease, mechanic's hands. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper. He tilted his head slightly. "I used to ask the same thing." He stepped closer, and the light from the headlights flickered across his face, and I saw it. The scar on his temple. The same scar I had from a bike accident when I was 15. The same uneven stubble, the same faint tattoo on the wrist. He was me. Older. Hollowed out. "I tried to leave," he said, voice cracking like dry wood. "Every road folds back. Every sunrise turns to dusk. You can't run from it." "What is it?" I asked. He looked past me toward the van that shimmered faintly behind us. "The moment you stopped listening. The one where you decided to keep driving when you should have stayed." I didn't understand. I felt dizzy, my breath coming short. He stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder, cold, weightless. "Time didn't stop," he said softly. "You did." The forest around us began to hum again. Low, mechanical, like a distant engine struggling to start. The air thickened with static. He backed away, his face fading into the glow. "You'll understand soon," he said. "You always do." Then he was gone. The clearing went black. I ran blindly, branches slapping my face, my lungs burning. When I burst back into the original campsite, my van was still there, idling, the engine alive. I jumped in, slammed the door, turned the headlights on, and hit the gas. Gravel sprayed. The road appeared ahead, a narrow stretch that looked real enough to be salvation. I didn't look back. For a few glorious seconds, I thought I'd made it. The trees blurred, and the dashboard lights flickered. Then the radio hissed. "Stay." I turned it off. The headlights dimmed. The air thickened again. And when I looked at the dashboard clock, my heart stopped. 7:04. I slammed the brakes and screamed. The sound barely reached the air. It felt swallowed, muted. My van had stopped at the exact same spot where it had first broken down, the same leaning trees, the same rusted signpost. That's when I understood. There was no exit. The road wasn't leading me out, it was leading me back. Every decision I made, every desperate attempt to flee folded time onto itself. I wasn't escaping the loop, I was the loop. I got out of the van, knees weak, and fell to the ground. My hands dug into the dirt, warm and pulsing like flesh. The earth moved slightly, like something beneath it was breathing. The air whispered, faint, multiple voices overlapping, all versions of mine. You should have left. You stayed. You're staying. I don't know how long I lay there before the numbness set in. When I finally stood, the forest was quiet again. My van waited, patient, the dashboard still glowing faintly. 7:04. I climbed back inside, shut the door, and just sat there. The air smelled of burnt pine and oil. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore, from clarity. Because I finally understood what he meant, what I meant. Somewhere, on that endless drive through the desert, I must have crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Maybe I fell asleep at the wheel. Maybe I crashed. Maybe the moment I thought I'd escaped the chaos of life, I'd actually left it behind. And now, this was what eternity looked like. One perfect sunset, one broken van, one frozen minute, repeating forever. The strange thing is, the longer I sit here, the less I want to leave. The silence feels honest. The stillness feels deserved. If you ever find yourself on Highway 395 and see an unmarked dirt road, don't take it. If you hear the clock whispering the same time over and over, don't listen. And if you see a faded Volkswagen parked beneath leaning pines, engine idling in the dusk, keep driving. Because the day never ended for me. It just stayed at 7:04 forever. My name's Chris Leland. I'm 41 years old, born and raised in Flagstaff, Arizona, the kind of town where the mountains kiss the sky and the desert starts whispering just a few miles down the road. I've been camping my whole life, and for most of that time, I thought I understood the rules of the wild. You know, respect the land, pack out what you pack in, never ignore your instincts. But the Mojave doesn't play by those rules. It's not just another desert. It's something alive, patient, ancient, and indifferent to whether you make it out or not. I'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone in the Southwest has. The old prospector ghosts, the soundless lights that move against the stars, the campers who vanish, leaving their chairs and half-eaten meals behind. But when I bought my RV 2 years ago, I told myself those tales were exaggerations. I thought I was prepared. Solar panels, backup fuel, satellite phone. I wanted to test myself, to feel what it was like to be completely alone under the kind of sky that makes you question whether you're supposed to be there at all. I set out on a Thursday in early May. The Mojave had already hit 90 degrees by noon, but I wasn't worried. I'd planned to stay near an abandoned service road just off Kelbaker, a place I found online through a forum of desert nomads. They called it Black Top Basin. The name came from the tar-dark soil and the way it shimmered in heat. It looked desolate, empty, perfect for solitude. The first night was silent, almost too silent. No wind, no coyotes, no shifting sand, just the low hum of my generator and the occasional creak of my RV's cooling metal. I cooked beans, drank a beer, and stared through my windshield at a sky so vast it felt like it might collapse in on me. The stars didn't twinkle out there. They pulsed. Some of them, I swore, moved just slightly, like they were being dragged slowly by invisible strings. That night, around 2, I woke up to the sound of gravel shifting outside my RV. It wasn't much, just a faint crunch, like someone dragging their foot. I grabbed my flashlight, turned it off, then on again just to make sure it was working. My first thought was that maybe a coyote or a jackrabbit had come sniffing around for food. I cracked the door open and scanned the desert. Nothing, just miles of empty, moon-bleached dust. But then I noticed something strange. About 30 yards away, where the land rose slightly into a low ridge, there were impressions. Not footprints, more like dense, circular, almost perfect 4 of them, in a straight line, like something had pressed down evenly and then lifted up again. I stood there staring until the wind kicked up, soft but steady, and erased them completely. The next morning, I brushed it off as exhaustion or some trick of the light. I brewed coffee, packed up my camera gear, and decided to hike a few miles north where I'd seen an old foundation from satellite images. As I walked, I noticed the sand in that area wasn't like the rest. It was darker, heavier, mixed with something metallic. Every step made a faint crackle, like static electricity. My hair kept standing on end, even though the air was still. About an hour into the hike, I came across something I'll never forget, a circle of glass. It wasn't man-made. It looked like desert sand melted into a perfect smooth disc about 5 feet across, half buried in the dirt. The edges were charred black, as if lightning had struck, but there hadn't been a storm in weeks. When I crouched to touch it, the glass was warm. Not from the sun, deeper, like a slow pulse. I felt that pulse in my fingers for the rest of the day. When I got back to the RV that evening, I noticed my solar inverter had tripped. The panels weren't charging, even though the sunlight was still blazing. My phone battery, which had been nearly full, drained to 0 when I tried turning on the GPS. I chalked it up to the heat. But as night fell, that quiet returned, the same oppressive stillness as before. And then came the lights. It started with a faint glimmer just beyond the ridge, like someone waving a flashlight back and forth. I stepped outside, thinking maybe another traveler had parked nearby. But there was no sound, no engine, no movement except the light, hovering, steady, flickering now and then as if hidden behind smoke. I called out, "Hello?" The sound of my own voice startled me. It came out smaller than I expected, swallowed by the open air. No response. The light dimmed, then split into 2, then 3, each one moving slowly, methodically, like they were searching for something in the sand. I backed into my RV, shut the door, and locked it. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would rattle the windows. I killed all the lights and watched through the windshield. The orbs moved closer. Not fast, just deliberate. When they got within maybe 50 feet, I realized they weren't floating above the ground like I thought. They were reflecting off something, a shape, pale and tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet. Every time one light dimmed, another one pulsed from its chest or head or whatever that part was. I don't remember deciding to hide, my body just did it. I slid down to the floor, tucked my knees under me, and tried to breathe quietly. The hum of my generator went dead. The air grew thick, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the RV. I could feel pressure in my ears, like being underwater. Then, tapping, soft, rhythmic. Not on the door, on the metal siding near the rear wheel well. 3 taps, pause, then 2, then silence. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, I must have blacked out from exhaustion or fear because when I woke, sunlight was spilling through the blinds and everything was normal again. The generator started fine. The solar charge was back. The tracks outside were gone. But something had changed. My reflection in the small mirror above the sink looked off. My eyes were bloodshot, yes, but that wasn't it. My skin looked dustier, my lips cracked like I'd been breathing dry air all night, and behind me through the small window there was a shadow that didn't belong. Not human, not animal. Too tall, too narrow, standing dead still against the morning glare. I turned fast, heart hammering, but nothing was there. That's when I should have left. Should have started the engine, driven out before the road heat could rise off the asphalt. But I didn't. Because that's what the desert does. It seduces you. It whispers that maybe you imagined it. Maybe you're tougher than you think. And when the fear fades just a little, the curiosity starts creeping back in. I told myself I'd stay one more night, just to prove I wasn't afraid, just to understand what I'd seen. But the Mojave remembers those who challenge it. It doesn't forgive. And that night, it made sure I'd never doubt it again. By the time the second sunset fell, I'd convinced myself the first night had been nothing more than exhaustion, maybe dehydration. Maybe I'd been half asleep and hallucinating. The rational side of me needed that explanation because the alternative, that something out there had found me, felt too big to understand. The desert that day was unnervingly beautiful. The kind of beauty that hurts to look at too long. Every color seemed too sharp. Orange ridges, black rock, blue that went on forever. My RV looked absurd out there. A little white box dropped into a landscape built to erase things. I took photos just to remind myself I'd really been there. When I checked them later, though, every image had faint blurs, smears of gray across the corners like fingerprints pressed against the lens. I spent the afternoon wandering the basin again, staying close to the vehicle this time. The wind had changed. It was hotter, almost chemical, carrying a smell like burning copper. My skin prickled beneath my shirt, and at times I could swear the air shimmered not from heat but from movement, like something walking just beyond sight. Still, by the time dusk came, I'd settled into a routine. I made dinner. I listened to an old podcast on my phone. I even laughed at one point with thinking about how easily I'd spooked myself the night before. Then just after 10, my phone buzzed. A single notification, though I had no service. Come outside. I froze. My first thought was that it was some kind of system glitch, maybe a corrupted file or a leftover text. I opened my messages. Nothing there. No history of it. The screen flickered, then went black. Outside, the air had gone still again. Too still. No insects, no wind, no cooling breeze from the west. The desert had gone completely silent, as if it were holding its breath. Then came the tapping. This time it wasn't at the side of the RV. It was on the roof. Slow, deliberate, tap, 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 tap. I killed the lights. My heart beat so loud I could hear blood rushing in my ears. I waited, counting the seconds between taps. They were steady, not random. A pattern. 4 beats, then pause. 4 beats again. Morse code. I didn't know much, but enough to recognize the rhythm for a letter repeating. H. 4 dots. H. Over and over again. H, H, hell. That word formed in my head before I even realized what I was thinking. My breath hitched. I crawled across the floor toward the small skylight near the front, moving as quietly as I could. Through it, I could see the stars, still bright, still endless, and something blocking a patch of them. It was standing on the RV. The outline was wrong, too long in the limbs, too narrow at the torso, its head cocked to one side like a bird listening. It moved slowly, methodically, its fingers brushing across the metal roof like it was reading the grooves. I wanted to believe it was a trick of shadow, but then one hand, if you could call it that, pressed flat against the skylight. 5 long shapes ending in points that left faint streaks like oil smudges. It leaned closer. I couldn't see its face, was only darkness where the glass reflected faint starlight. My chest tightened. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. And then it whispered. Right above me, a voice rasped through the thin ceiling. Not words exactly, but something that felt like they wanted to be words, like someone learning speech for the first time, shaping air into sound. The tone was low, dry, almost intimate. Then, silence. The pressure lifted, the RV creaked, and the stars returned. When I finally dared to look outside again, nothing was there. No footprints, no sign of life, just the night, stretching forever. That's when I realized something even worse. The desert had moved. My landmarks were gone. The ridge that had always sat north of the RV now seemed closer, smaller. The horizon felt tilted. I walked about 20 feet from the RV to confirm it wasn't just perspective, but the ground itself had changed. The glassy circle I'd found before, gone. In its place, a shallow depression as if something had risen out of it. My mind kept trying to rationalize shifting sands, mirage, fatigue, but the truth was crawling at the edges of my thoughts, that maybe the Mojave wasn't a place you traveled through. Maybe it rearranged itself around you. When I returned to the RV, I noticed another message on my phone. No number, no contact, just text, glowing on the dead screen. You're standing where it breathed. The words made me sick. My vision tunneled. I dropped the phone, stumbled back, and hit my shoulder against the counter. My coffee mug crashed to the floor. When I looked up, every light in the RV flickered just once, then died completely. For a moment, there was nothing but blackness. Then, faintly from outside, came a low humming. Not mechanical, more like resonance, the kind you feel in your bones when a truck passes on a highway bridge. Except this didn't fade. It grew, deepened. It felt inside me. I grabbed my flashlight, but when I turned it on, the beam stuttered, weak, pale, like it was fighting something in the air. Through the narrow windshield, I saw movement again near the ridge. Dozens of faint, wavering lights, almost like lanterns carried by invisible hands. They drifted, weaving together into a shape that reminded me of a doorway. And through it, shadows passed. I can't describe them, not clearly. They weren't people, not animals either, just outlines, like heat distortion given weight. Every time one crossed through that doorway, the air pressure in the RV shifted, my ears popped, and the metallic smell intensified. Then one of them stopped, turned, if you can call it that, and looked toward me. I don't know how I knew it was looking, but I did. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but where? The road behind me was gone, buried under dunes. My GPS was still dead. There was nowhere to go except deeper. The humming turned into vibration. The cupboards rattled. The floor trembled beneath my feet. Something scraped against the undercarriage again. That same tapping rhythm. Faster now, urgent. Tap, 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 tap. I stumbled toward the driver's seat and turned the key. Nothing. Not even a click. I slammed my palm against the wheel. "Come on," I shouted, desperate. My voice cracked, swallowed by the thickening air. And then faintly from the radio, even though it wasn't on, came a whisper. My name. Chris. Over and over, stretching, distorting, each repetition a little less human, until it wasn't language anymore. Just sound. That broke me. I kicked the transmission into neutral and let the RV roll backward, praying gravity would do something. It moved maybe 3 feet before jerking to a stop, like something was holding it in place. The tires spun, spraying sand, but I wasn't moving. I looked out the windshield and saw handprints appear in the dust on the glass. From the outside, one by one, pressed against it, each larger than the last. Then, with a sound like glass flexing, they began to push. I didn't think. I bolted to the back, grabbed the emergency flare from under the bed, struck it, and hurled it out the door. The burst of red light hit the sand, and for just a second, everything outside recoiled. The shadows, the lights, the air itself seemed to pull back. I slammed the door shut, locked it again, and sat there, shaking. The flare light flickering through the curtains, my hands wouldn't stop trembling. My pulse wouldn't slow down. I kept whispering to myself, you're okay, it's just the heat, it's just the heat. But somewhere, beneath that whisper, another voice answered, you stayed too long. When dawn finally came, I didn't believe it at first. The light looked wrong, too thin, too white, like it wasn't sunlight but something imitating it. My hands shook as I cracked open the door. The air outside was cool again, almost pleasant, and the flare I'd thrown hours before had burned itself into a black ring in the sand. But the strangest part was how clean everything looked. The RV's windshield? Clear. The ground? Smooth, undisturbed. My tire tracks from yesterday? Gone, as if I'd never driven in at all. The desert had erased me overnight. I told myself this was my sign to leave. No photos, no bravery, no proving myself. Just pack up and go. But when I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, the GPS screen blinked to life for the first time since the night before. Except it didn't show a map. It showed a black background with one single white dot pulsing in the center. No coordinates, no roads, just a word beneath it. Wait! Every rational part of me screamed to ignore it, but I couldn't look away. My reflection in the screen stared back at me, distorted, hollow-eyed. I blinked, and for a fraction of a second, I saw someone else in that reflection, taller, thinner, standing behind me. I spun around. Nothing. That's when I noticed the smell. Faint, but unmistakable. Wet earth. Impossible. The Mojave doesn't smell like that. There hadn't been rain in months. I stepped outside, scanning the ground, and saw that the sand beneath my RV was damp, not just darkened by dew, wet, as if something had been bleeding up from below. The dirt squelched under my boots. When I crouched down, I saw it wasn't water. It was thicker, slicker, almost oil, almost sap, and it was moving. Tiny ripples spread through it, like it was breathing. I stumbled back, scraping my palm on the metal door. The liquid pulsed once, and a low vibration traveled up through the soles of my feet. That was the moment I realized it. Whatever I had seen out there that night, it hadn't just visited. It was still here, beneath me. I jumped into the RV, started the engine, and floored it. The tires spun, flinging mud-like sand behind me before finally catching. The RV lurched forward, fishtailing through the basin. My mirrors reflected nothing but sun glare and dust. I didn't look back. I couldn't. After what felt like forever, I spotted a stretch of cracked pavement, the old service road. Relief hit me so hard I almost sobbed. I turned onto it and kept driving, faster than I should have, letting the engine scream against the silence. But then the landscape started repeating. At first, I thought it was just déjà vu, the same cactus, the same rocks. But after the third time I passed that same rusted road sign bent at the same angle, I knew. I slammed on the brakes. The world outside the windshield shimmered. Heat mirage, I thought, until the shimmer began to move against the wind. The desert was looping. I stepped out of the RV and walked to the sign. The air around it was heavy, humming, like static electricity before a storm. When I reached out to touch it, the metal was ice cold. My breath fogged in the desert. I pulled my hand back, and for just a heartbeat, my fingers left an imprint that glowed. I stared at that light until it faded. I didn't understand it, not then, but I felt it. This place wasn't meant to be crossed by people. It was meant to trap them. My mind started spinning. Maybe there was some kind of magnetic anomaly or toxic gas leak or mass hallucination caused by solar flares. I threw every scientific excuse I could at the fear crawling up my spine. But none of it explained the whisper that came next. It was inside the RV again, soft as breath, and it said, "You saw it breathe." My chest locked. I turned toward the sound, but there was no one there. Only my reflection in the glass, and behind that, faint shapes moving beneath the surface of the sand outside. At that point, I stopped trying to understand and started begging. "Please," I whispered into the still air, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to stay. Just let me go." For a long time, nothing happened. Then faintly, I heard something, a low rumble, almost like an engine. I jumped back into the driver's seat, turned the key again, and this time the GPS flickered back to life, now showing a thin red line leading north. No destination, no name, just direction. I didn't hesitate. I drove. The desert around me blurred. The horizon shifted colors, gold gray, blood orange, faster than the sun could possibly move. The road under my wheels cracked and healed, cracked again. My hands were slick with sweat, and my throat burned. But I kept driving until at last in the distance I saw a shape that looked like salvation, a building. It was a gas station. I pulled in too fast, brakes screaming. The structure looked ancient, sun-faded signs, shattered windows, but I didn't care. I stumbled out, waving my arms, shouting for help. No one answered. The pumps were rusted, the air dry as bone, but the door to the convenience store was open. Inside, it was dim and cold. Not naturally cold, wrong cold. My breath fogged again. Shelves still stood, stocked with faded bags of chips and discolored bottles of soda. There was even a radio on the counter, hissing faint static. I reached for it, desperate for any voice, any sound. When my fingers brushed the dial, the static cleared, replaced by the same low hum from the night before. Then a voice, not whispering now, not distorted, calm, almost kind. "Chris, you've driven far enough." I froze. The sound wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was behind me. Slowly I turned. Standing near the back of the store was a figure, human-shaped, wearing what looked like an old ranger uniform bleached by decades of sun. But his face wasn't right. The skin looked stretched too thin, as if the bones beneath were shifting. His eyes were perfectly black, reflecting the aisles behind me. "You don't belong here," he said softly. "Not anymore." My knees went weak. "What are you?" I whispered. He tilted his head like a curious animal, something that remembers what this land forgot. He took a step closer, and the floor under him warped, sagged like soft clay. "You felt it breathe. That means it felt you." I stumbled back toward the door, fumbling for my keys. "I just want to leave," I said. "I just want out." "You were out," he murmured, "until you asked to understand." Then he smiled, too wide, stretching until the corners of his mouth nearly touched his ears. And just like that, the lights went out. When they came back on, the station was empty. Dust hung in the air, the radio was silent. My reflection in the glass door stared back at me, and for the first time, it wasn't moving in sync. My reflection blinked a second too late, just half a beat behind me. Then it smiled, even though I hadn't. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, knocking over a rack of old postcards. The cards scattered like feathers across the dusty tile. My reflection put its head in perfect rhythm with the ones fluttering down, and for a second, I could swear I saw something behind its shoulder. A shape, faint and enormous, like a rib cage made of light pulsing against a black horizon. Then it flickered once and the glass went dark. I bolted. Outside, the RV was still there, idling like it had never stalled at all. The desert wind had picked up, carrying sand in low spirals that moved against the direction of the gusts. I climbed into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and just sat there for a moment, shaking. I didn't dare look in the mirrors again. The radio clicked on by itself. No music, no voice this time, just that hum again, so low it made the steering wheel vibrate. The frequency crawled up my teeth like static. I gritted my jaw, slammed my fist against the power knob, and the sound cut out. The silence afterward was somehow worse. I pressed my foot on the gas, desperate to leave. The RV lurched forward. The cracked asphalt peeled away behind me. And for a brief, stupid moment, I thought maybe I'd finally broken free. Until I saw the gas station again. The same one, same leaning sign, same flapping open banner in faded red cloth. I pressed harder on the pedal. Dust kicked up in a golden storm behind me. A mile later, the same gas station again. The same layout. The same damn torn flag slapping against the same wind. That was the moment something inside me broke. I slammed the brakes, jumped out, and screamed into the empty air, "What do you want from me?" The echo came back faster than it should have, not delayed, immediate. And when it did, it wasn't my voice anymore. It was something deeper, throatier, ancient, to be remembered. The sand stirred like it was breathing again. I fell to my knees, staring at the ground, at the faint pulse moving beneath it. The earth wasn't still. It was alive, like an animal in hibernation, like something waiting for enough warmth or sound or attention to wake. And I'd given it all three. The sun was fading fast now. The horizon bent in strange colors, violet, gray, a band of orange that seemed to bleed upward instead of down. I backed toward the RV, my legs trembling, and climbed inside, locking the doors even though I knew it wouldn't help. Inside, everything smelled wrong again. Not dust, not oil, but wet earth, that same smell from before. It seeped through the floor vents. I glanced at my phone, still dead. My watch, frozen at 7:12 p.m., no matter how long I stared. I grabbed my camera, my one working device, and started recording, pointing it at the windshield, the gauges, my face. I needed proof, something to hold on to. "I'm in the Mojave," I said into the lens, voice cracking. "If anyone finds this RV, my name is Chris Leland. I don't know where I am or if this road is real. Something out here, something buried. It's alive. Don't." The camera shut off, just black. And then, faintly, from the speakers in the dashboard, my own voice began to play back, that same recording I just made, word for word. But when it got to the last line, it didn't stop. It kept talking. "Don't listen to me. Don't believe this part. He's still here. He's watching through the glass." I threw the camera down and hit the engine again. The RV roared louder than before, trembling beneath me like it wanted to shake apart. I didn't care where I ended up. I just needed out. I drove until the night swallowed the horizon. The stars overhead blurred into smears, the road beneath me fading from blacktop to dirt to nothing at all. Then ahead, lights. Not headlights, lanterns. They floated low to the ground, the same ones I'd seen before, weaving like willow wisps through the dunes. This time, though, they didn't stay distant. They moved toward me, slow, deliberate. And with each yard they gained, my RV slowed, like the engine itself was bowing to their approach. The wheel stiffened in my hands. The windshield began to fog from the outside. Shapes moved behind it, tall, narrow, jointed wrong. Their skin reflected light like water. I slammed the horn, but no sound came out. Then the passenger door creaked. I hadn't unlocked it, I know I hadn't. But the latch turned, slow and deliberate, like a hand testing it from the other side. The seal broke with a sigh, and a gust of air colder than ice swept through. I turned, and there, sitting in the passenger seat, was me. Paler, hollow-eyed, lips split from dryness. He stared straight ahead, hands resting neatly on his knees. His voice came out soft. "You shouldn't have driven." My throat closed. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. He turned his head slowly, his eyes catching what little light there was. And in those eyes, I didn't see pupils. I saw the desert, endless, rolling, breathing. He smiled faintly like he pitied me. It never wanted you to leave, it just needed someone to remember. Then he was gone. No sound, no shimmer, just gone. I was alone again, except for the faint handprints fogging on the inside of the windshield, dozens of them, small and large, pressing gently like waves against glass. The engine sputtered once, twice, then died. And in the sudden silence, something began to knock. Not from outside, from underneath. 3 knocks, pause, then 2. The same rhythm. My body went rigid. I didn't dare look down, but the floor began to flex, soft, like something massive was shifting beneath it. The metal groaned, the bolts popped. A sound like deep inhalation filled the air, sucking every ounce of breath from my lungs. And then from under the RV, a voice as vast as the sky whispered up through the cracks in the metal floorboards, "Stay." The lights cut out. The desert swallowed me whole. When I came to, I thought it was morning. But the light leaking through the blinds wasn't sunlight. It was gray, metallic, like the inside of a storm that never came. My mouth was dry. My throat burned like I'd swallowed dust for hours. For a long time, I didn't move. I just listened. No sound, not even wind. The RV was tilted, nose down, as if one side had sunk into the sand. The air smelled like rust and wet soil again. Stronger now. So strong it coated the back of my tongue. My first thought was carbon monoxide, or some kind of gas leak. I stumbled toward the back window, forcing it open, and what I saw made my knees go weak. The desert was gone. In its place was something else. A vast plain of black glass stretched in every direction, reflecting a sky that wasn't sky at all, just a swirling gray emptiness, moving like smoke behind invisible glass. The air shimmered, bending light the wrong way. The horizon rose and fell in gentle waves as if the ground itself were breathing. My RV sat crooked in the middle of it all, half buried in glassy soil that pulsed faintly under its weight. I scrambled to the driver's seat, gripping the wheel like it might anchor me back to reality. But the dashboard lights flickered with unfamiliar symbols, not letters, not numbers, shapes that looked like concentric circles, each one spinning slowly counter to the others. The radio crackled again. Not static this time, but faint, distant sobbing. I leaned closer, heart pounding. It wasn't one voice, it was many. Dozens, layered over each other, echoing through static. Some were whispering, some were calling for help, some were just breathing. And then, clear through the noise, came a single phrase, "The Mojave remembers." I jerked the volume knob to off. Nothing happened. The sound grew louder, more distorted, the words melting together into something that sounded like laughter. Then, silence. In the stillness that followed, I heard something scrape against the outside of the RV. Long, slow, deliberate, like fingers dragging across glass. I turned toward the window and froze. Outside, the reflection wasn't mine. It was staring back. My shape, my build. But the eyes were gone, replaced by 2 faint lights burning deep inside the sockets. Behind it, something was moving. Hundreds of silhouettes, crawling across the glassy plain, their limbs stretching too far, bending wrong, each one leaving behind streaks of light that sank slowly into the surface like ink into water. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then I heard it again, that same whisper from under the RV, vibrating through the floorboards. "Stay," it came again, stronger. "Stay." The floor flexed. The metal beneath my feet rippled like soft clay. The RV began to sink, inch by inch. I slammed my hands against the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. I kicked it, screamed, rammed my shoulder into it, but it felt welded shut. The windows wouldn't open either. The glass was warm, alive. As the floor sank deeper, the air pressure crushed around me. My ears popped. The steering wheel bent under my grip. I reached for the emergency hammer, the little red one I'd bought at a Walmart months ago, and swung it as hard as I could against the side window. The first strike bounced off. The second cracked it, not with the sound of breaking glass, but like shattering ice underwater. A faint hum poured through the crack, deep and resonant, shaking through my chest. Then a voice, clearer than before, whispered right against my ear, though no one was there. You breathed where it sleeps. The window exploded outward, and I fell through it into that black glass. It wasn't solid. It gave way beneath me like thick liquid. I landed hard, arms sinking to my elbows, cold searing through my skin. I tried to pull free, but the surface clung to me, stretching like tar. Beneath it, faint shapes writhed, pale hands pressing upward from below, brushing my legs, my arms, my face. I screamed and kicked until somehow impossibly the surface loosened and I crawled out, gasping. The RV was half submerged now, only the roof visible. The air buzzed with energy, the same deep vibration echoing through the soles of my feet. Then, in the distance, I saw them again, the lights. Hundreds of them, arranged in a perfect circle around me, flickering in and out of existence. Each pulse sent a tremor through the ground, like the heartbeat of something vast, and in the center of that circle, it rose. At first, it looked like a column of smoke, twisting upward, black against black. Then, as it solidified, I saw it wasn't smoke at all. It was made of faces. Dozens, maybe hundreds, fused together, their mouths open in silent screams. They shifted, merged, dissolved into one another like reflections in disturbed water. A single shape emerged from that mass. Tall, featureless, except for eyes that weren't eyes, but holes through which more of that gray, living sky poured. Its presence pressed against me like gravity, like the weight of the entire desert condensed into one moment. I couldn't run. I couldn't even think. It spoke without sound. The words formed in my head, each one heavy as stone. You came to see what we buried. You remembered the breath beneath the dust. You gave it shape again. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. I didn't mean to, I said, though my voice came out a whisper. I didn't mean anything. The thing leaned closer. Its form rippled like heat haze. When it spoke again, I felt it more than heard it. You are ours now. The ground opened beneath me. I fell through darkness that felt alive, like falling through lungs mid-breath. The air pressed against me, whispering thousands of voices, all speaking fragments of the same word, stay. Then, impact. I hit something solid. Sand. Real sand. I was lying half buried beside my RV, which sat quietly in the morning light of a desert that looked once again like the Mojave. Birds chirped, wind moved, the sky was its familiar endless blue. For a long while I didn't move, I just listened. When I finally did stand, I noticed my watch ticking again, 7:13 a.m. The windshield was cracked, the tires half sunk in dirt, but everything else looked fine. Normal. Too normal. I laughed, a choked, hysterical sound. It was over. Somehow, impossibly, it was over. But as I turned toward the RV's door, something caught my eye. Beneath my boots, etched faintly into the sand, were 5 perfect circular impressions. Not footprints, not tire tracks, just depressions, smooth, deliberate, and pulsing faintly like they had a heartbeat. The same marks I'd seen on the first night. And then I heard it again, so quiet, I almost thought it was the wind, a whisper from the earth beneath my feet. The Mojave remembers. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at those 5 perfect circles pressed into the sand. The morning light shimmered off them like heat waves, and for a heartbeat, I thought they were glowing again. Breathing. I blinked, and they were still there, faintly pulsing with a rhythm that didn't belong to wind or heartbeat or earth. My body wanted to collapse, but my mind wouldn't let it. I needed to move. I needed to get out before the desert changed its mind. I climbed into the RV and started the engine. It turned over perfectly, smooth, almost too smooth, like it had never stalled, never been buried, never trapped me in whatever nightmare I'd crawled out of. I put it in drive and rolled forward slowly, eyes darting between the mirrors. half expecting the reflection to smile again or move out of sync. It didn't. The Mojave stretched out ahead, silent, endless, almost forgiving. The kind of silence you mistake for peace before it swallows you whole. The road appeared again, cracked, sun-bleached, stretching toward the pale horizon. I drove. I didn't stop for hours. The air grew hotter, the world steadier. By late afternoon, I saw the faded green of a highway sign up ahead. Civilization. Hope. The sign read, "Welcome to Kelbaker Road, 18 miles to Baker." I almost cried. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. For the first time in days, the GPS worked. My phone lit up with signal bars. Text messages flooded in from friends wondering where I'd gone. The normal world, the human world, was still there. I pulled over at a rest stop just outside Baker, trembling with relief. There were people there, real people. A family unloading snacks from a van, an old trucker leaning against a vending machine. I wanted to hug them all. I wanted to tell them everything, the lights, the glass, the voices. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. The words wouldn't form. I realized then, maybe no one would ever believe it anyway. I refueled, checked the tires, grabbed a bottle of water from the gas station cooler, and stood there for a long time staring at my reflection in the door's glass. I looked like myself again. Same eyes, same face, same hands that still wouldn't stop trembling. Then, as I turned to leave, I noticed something carved faintly into the dust on my RV's driver's side window. Just one word: stay. I wiped it off fast, told myself it was a prank, some leftover smudge, or the mind playing tricks. But even as the word disappeared, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe it hadn't been written on the glass. Maybe it had been written inside it. That night, I parked at a real RV park. Lights, hookups, other campers. Safety. A man named Rick invited me to sit by the communal fire. He asked where I'd been traveling, and I hesitated before answering. "The Mojave," I said finally. His expression changed instantly. Not fear, exactly, but a kind of recognition. "Out past Kelbaker?" he asked. "Yeah." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Don't go back there," he said simply. "Not alone. People think it's empty, but it isn't. The desert there doesn't forget who's crossed it." That line hit me hard. The desert doesn't forget. I nodded, forcing a laugh. I believed that. Later that night, as everyone drifted back to their rigs, I sat outside under the porch light and looked at the stars. Normal stars this time. Still. Unmoving. The kind that made sense. I told myself I'd survived, that it was over. But the desert, it doesn't just let go. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a sound. Faint, rhythmic, tap, 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 tap. I froze. My chest tightened, the same pattern, the same rhythm, the one I'd heard under the RV before. I told myself it was plumbing or some critter under the chassis. I didn't move. I just lay there, counting the taps. After the 6th repetition, it stopped. Then came the hum. Faint, barely audible. A deep vibration under the mattress, like the earth itself was breathing again. I sat up fast, my breath fogged. The air inside the RV was freezing, though the heater had been running all night. The window glass shimmered, faint light moving through it, like something trying to press its way in. I whispered to myself, no, not again, not here. The hum deepened and a single word formed in it, not through sound, but through vibration. Remember. And then it was gone, just gone. The heater clicked back on. The hum vanished. The air warmed. I sat awake until dawn, staring at that same window, waiting for another sign. Nothing came. But when the morning sun rose, I saw the faint outline of handprints across the glass. Not outside. Inside. That was the last time I ever camped in the desert. I sold the RV a month later. The guy who bought it was a retired teacher from Nevada. Nice man. We shook hands, I handed him the keys, and he told me he was headed east, toward Mojave Preserve. For a split second, I thought about warning him. I almost said, don't go. Don't camp there. Ever. But I didn't. Because how do you tell someone the land breathes? How do you explain that it remembers? 2 weeks later, I got curious, stupidly curious, and searched his name online. There was a local news article from Barstow. Missing Nevada man's RV found abandoned near Kelbaker Road. No signs of foul play. The vehicle was empty, engine running, Authorities assumed heat exhaustion. I knew better. Sometimes when the wind shifts in the right direction here in Flagstaff, I swear I can smell that same burnt copper scent, that metallic breath that comes right before the world goes silent. And every time I do, I stop whatever I'm doing, look to the horizon, and whisper back into that invisible expanse, I remember. Because that's what it wants. It doesn't hunt. It waits. It doesn't kill. It keeps. And once you've stood where the Mojave breathes, a part of you never leaves. So if you ever take your RV into that desert, if you ever find yourself alone beneath those silent stars, parked on ground that feels just a little too warm, get out. Don't wait. Don't investigate. Don't be brave, because the Mojave doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive. It just remembers you forever. I used to think loneliness was something you could cure with noise. I'd bring a small Bluetooth speaker on every Volkswagen trip, blasting some old country songs just loud enough to feel like someone else was there with me. But on that drive through the low valleys of southern Kentucky, the silence felt alive, like it was waiting for me to break it. I'd been traveling for nearly 8 hours, my blue 1978 Volkswagen Westphalia rattling on the 2-lane road that curved along a forgotten river. The sun had already fallen, leaving that strange half-light that makes every tree look like it's leaning a little closer to the road. I was headed toward a small campground outside of Horse Cave, Kentucky, a place I'd found through a friend named Mark, who swore it was one of the last real spots left for boondocking. Mark was a local who rebuilt old Volkswagens for a living. He'd told me over the phone, just follow the road till you see the blue barn. Don't pass it. If you hit the dead cottonwood, you've gone too far. The campground's just behind that barn. Trust me, it's quiet out there. It was that word, quiet, that convinced me. After the week I'd had, I wanted quiet. The kind that sinks into your bones. The kind that feels like starting over. The road narrowed as the night thickened. The Volkswagen's headlights sliced through fog, catching patches of grass and old wooden fences. My gas gauge wavered on the line between a quarter and empty. The radio hissed between stations until it finally gave up, the static replaced by a dull hum from the old engine. That was when I saw it, the barn. It stood off the road, maybe 50 yards away, the color washed pale under my headlights. Faded blue paint peeled from its sides like dried skin. The roof sagged slightly in the middle, and a single lantern glowed near the open doors, the kind of dim yellow that flickers just enough to make you second-guess whether it's a light at all. There was no sound, not even crickets. I slowed, rolled down the window, and called out. Nothing, just the smell of wet earth and something faintly metallic, like rust or old tools left in the rain. I thought about what Mark said, don't pass the barn. So I pulled over, the gravel crunched under my tires, then went still. I turned off the engine, and for a moment it felt like the whole world held its breath. Then, from somewhere near the barn, I heard a soft clink, like a chain brushing against metal. I told myself it was just wind against a gate, but the air was still. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out, and the door of the Volkswagen creaked behind me. My boots sank into damp gravel as I walked toward the barn. The closer I got, the more I noticed how wrong it looked. The boards weren't just old, they were bent inward, warped as if something had pushed from inside. The lantern hung from a hook by the doorway, swaying gently. Inside, the light fell across a wide dirt floor, and in the far corner, something shined. It was a mirror, an old one, tall, with its frame cracked and flaking white. It faced the door, reflecting that same dull light back toward me. But in the reflection, the lantern didn't sway. It stood perfectly still. I froze. My light trembled slightly in my hand. Then I heard the chain again. This time, closer, behind me. When I turned, the road looked empty. The Volkswagen sat still and harmless, its windows dark. But I could feel something in the air, that strange vibration you sense when you know you're being watched but can't see from where. That was enough for me. I backed away slowly, not running, not daring to. I got back into the Volkswagen, turned the key, and the old engine coughed twice before it caught. The headlights lit up the barn again, and that was when I noticed something I swear hadn't been there before. A single handprint on the barn door. A wet, dark mark, as if someone had pressed their palm there just seconds before. I drove past it. The campground appeared less than a mile later, a clearing lined with oak trees and an old wooden sign that read Green Hollow Grounds. There were only 2 other campers there, both older Volkswagens, oddly enough, parked near the edge of the tree line. No sounds, no lights, no people. I found a spot near the center, killed the engine, and finally exhaled. For a while, I just sat there in the driver's seat, hands still on the wheel. My pulse was pounding in my wrists. I could feel every creak of the van's frame, every small sound amplified by the quiet. Eventually, I laughed under my breath, a nervous, broken sound, and told myself it was just fatigue. Maybe the handprint was old, maybe the reflection was my imagination. I turned on the small cabin light and started setting up the backseat bed. The van smelled like oil and cedar from the wood paneling I'd built last summer. It felt safe again, my own little world. But that illusion didn't last long. Sometime around midnight, I woke to a sound, a soft tapping, faint but steady, like someone gently knocking on the outside of the van. 3 taps. Pause. Then 3 again. I sat up slowly, trying to adjust to the dim light spilling from the moon through the curtains. The sound came from the rear, near the back window. My first thought was wind, maybe a branch. But the air outside had gone completely still. I reached for my flashlight, my hand trembling just enough to make the beam shake when I switched it on. I pulled the curtain aside. Nothing. The trees stood silent. The ground shimmered faintly from dew. Then the tapping came again, but this time from the side door. My chest tightened. I swung the light toward it, barely breathing. The door's handle twitched, not pulled, not forced, just nudged. A faint metallic click echoed through the van's hollow interior. I couldn't see anyone outside. Then I remembered the 2 Volkswagens parked at the edge of the clearing. Maybe one of the campers had come by. Maybe they needed something or were checking on me. So I called out, my voice low and unsteady. "Hey, someone there." No answer. I slid open the side window an inch and shined the flashlight through. That's when I saw it. The faint blue reflection on the grass, like the color of that barn's paint. It wasn't moonlight, it was too dim, too directed. It looked almost like someone had smeared a blue glow across the earth. And in that reflection I could make out footprints, bare ones, leading toward the woods. I shut the window. For the rest of the night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the driver's seat with the key ready, the flashlight pointed at the door, and my heart beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every few minutes, the van creaked like something was leaning against it from the outside. By dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped out into the fog. The other 2 Volkswagens were gone. Their tire tracks curved out of the clearing, heading toward the main road. But in the spot where they'd been parked, the grass was pressed down in perfect circles, like they hadn't driven away, but been lifted. And near the edge of my van, half hidden in mud, was that same faint blue color. A smear across the ground, almost glowing in the early morning light. I followed it. It led through the trees, down a narrow trail I hadn't noticed before. My flashlight barely cut through the fog as I moved deeper, the sound of my boots muffled by wet leaves. The air smelled like something burned long ago. Then, through the mist, I saw the shape again, the barn, the same blue walls, the same broken roof. But this time the lantern inside was brighter, and I could hear something, a low hum, steady and strange, like electricity buried underground. That's when I noticed the door was open wider, and inside something moved. I took one slow step toward the barn, flashlight trembling slightly in my grip. The morning fog swirled around me like breath, blurring the edges of everything. From inside the barn, the hum deepened, a low, pulsing tone that made my ribs buzz. It wasn't a sound I could place. Not electrical, not mechanical, more like something alive trying to stay quiet. The door creaked wider as I approached, though the air was completely still. The lantern inside swung slightly, its light washing over the dirt floor, revealing scattered metal tools, old wrenches, a rusted shovel, a coil of chain. And right in the center of the floor was that mirror again. Only now it wasn't standing where it had been the night before. It was lying flat, face up, like someone had placed it there deliberately. The surface rippled faintly, like water disturbed by the faintest breeze. I stopped at the threshold. Every instinct screamed to turn around, get back in the van, and drive until I ran out of road. But there was something else in me, a pull, almost magnetic. Something about that mirror felt wrong in a way I couldn't describe, and I needed to understand it. Maybe because I'd been running from the strange for most of my life. I crouched slowly, flashlight aimed at the surface. My reflection looked back, pale, tense, my eyes wide. But the lantern's reflection behind me didn't move in sync. It stayed perfectly still, burning brighter and brighter until I had to squint. And in that bright patch of light behind my reflection, something began to form. A face. Not mine. It was faint at first, like the memory of someone rather than the person themselves. A man, maybe in his 50s, with deep lines across his forehead, his mouth slightly open as if whispering. His eyes were sunken, dark. He was wearing what looked like a faded blue jacket and smeared with that same pale color that covered the barn walls. And then he moved. Not in the reflection, in the glass itself. I stumbled back, tripping over a chain near the entrance. The sound clattered through the barn, echoing too long, like it was bouncing through a hollow that wasn't physically there. When I looked again, the mirror was still. Just me, just dirt. But the hum had stopped. I turned to leave, and as I did, I caught something in the corner of my eye, carved into one of the wooden support beams near the door. It was a word, jagged and shallow, carved with something dull. Light. I traced it with my fingers, the wood splintering beneath my touch. Then I realized there were smaller letters beneath it, faded almost completely away. Keep it light. Or maybe, keep the light. That was when I heard footsteps outside. Slow, measured. I stepped back into the shadow, my flashlight flicked off, holding my breath. The sound came closer, then paused just outside the doorway. Whoever it was didn't try to come in. Instead, I heard the faint scrape of something against the wall. A metallic rasp, like they were dragging a tool along the barn's siding. I waited. 1 second. 2. 10. Then silence again. When I finally worked up the nerve to look outside, there was no one there, just fog and the long, empty field beyond. But in the mud, just by the doorframe, there were fresh footprints. Bare, the same shape I'd seen in the grass by the van. I ran. I don't remember the path back clearly, just flashes of trees, the snap of branches under my boots, the way the fog seemed to close behind me. When I reached the clearing, my van looked smaller somehow, shrunken against the pale light of morning. I threw my bag in the front seat, started the engine, and didn't even bother to pack the camping gear I'd set outside earlier. I just needed to be gone. The dirt road wound back toward the highway, but the more I drove, the less familiar it felt. I should have been heading east, back toward town, but the landscape kept repeating itself. The same crooked fence, the same fallen tree, the same set of telephone poles. It was like driving in a loop. The third time I passed what looked like the same stretch of road, I slammed the brakes. The engine idled roughly, coughing once, and then died. The air went dead quiet again. I stepped out, heart pounding, scanning the horizon. Then I saw it through the thin veil of fog ahead, the blue barn. No matter where I turned, I was back. This time, though, something had changed. The lantern was gone. The mirror was gone. The barn doors stood wide open, revealing only darkness. I thought about turning the van around, but when I looked behind me, the road had vanished into mist. There was no way to tell which direction I'd come from. For a moment, I just stood there in the road, gripping the steering wheel like it could anchor me to reality. Then I heard a voice, faint, like wind whispering through metal. You shouldn't have looked. I spun, searching, but there was no one in sight. The voice came again, closer, right beside me this time. Keep the light. And then the hum returned. deep, vibrating through the ground, through my bones, through the van itself. The dashboard lights flickered, the radio clicked on by itself, and static filled the cabin. Between the bursts of static, I could hear fragments of a broadcast, a man's voice repeating numbers, then pausing, then whispering something unintelligible. I turned the knob, trying to shut it off, but it only grew louder. The hum merged with the static until it became one sound, like 1,000 wires tightening all at once. And then, for a split second, the radio cleared. "Come to the barn." The engine roared back to life on its own. The headlights flicked on, illuminating the road ahead. My hands weren't even on the keys anymore. The van began rolling forward, slowly, like it was being pulled. The steering wheel twisted under my fingers, guiding itself. I fought it, braced my weight against the seat, tried to force the wheel to turn, but it was no use. The van moved of its own accord, tires crunching gravel, the fog parting just enough to reveal the outline of that barn once again. Only now, there were shapes inside. Figures. 4, maybe 5 of them. Standing still, facing the open door. Their clothes were pale, almost the same blue as the walls, blending into the shadows. And each of them held something. Small lanterns, all glowing with that dim, yellow light. I slammed the brakes, but the van kept rolling until the front bumper touched the barn's threshold. The hum stopped. The figures didn't move. Then, in perfect unison, they turned their lanterns toward me. The light hit the windshield, they're flooding the cabin. My own reflection stared back at me from the glass, but it wasn't quite right. My eyes were open wider than they should have been, my mouth slack. And behind my reflection, in the back of the van, stood someone else. I didn't move. Couldn't. My breath caught somewhere in my throat, shallow and weak, as my eyes locked on that faint silhouette behind me. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a reflection bent wrong by the windshield glare. But then it shifted, just a fraction, a slow lean forward like someone adjusting their weight. The air in the van grew dense, heavy with that smell again. Metal, dust, something faintly burnt. My fingers dug into the steering wheel as the lantern light outside flickered, each pulse revealing more detail in the glass. The shape behind me wasn't some ghostly blur. It was a man. He was standing right where my bed platform was, head nearly grazing the ceiling. His face was obscured by shadow, but I could see the faint outline of that same blue jacket I'd seen in the mirror. The fabric shimmered slightly, like it wasn't entirely there. Not cloth, not solid. Something between. And his mouth was moving. I couldn't hear what he said at first. Then, through the static from the radio, I caught it. "Turn it off." The words came in bursts, as if layered over the hum, each syllable rattling through the dashboard. "Turn it off." I looked at the radio. The dial spun wildly on its own, the station light flickering across numbers. For one instant, it landed on a clear frequency, 104.3, and I heard breathing. Not static, not a broadcast, just slow, wet breathing like someone pressed up against the microphone on the other end. The man in the back leaned closer. "Turn it off," he whispered again, and for a moment, the voice wasn't coming from the radio at all. It was coming from him. I twisted the knob. The sound died instantly. When I looked back up, he was gone. The back of the van was empty. Just my blankets, the small lantern I'd left on the shelf, and the faint scent of something burnt out. Outside, the figures still stood in a line, their lanterns lifted toward me, unmoving. I could see their faces now, blank, almost peaceful, eyes pale and unblinking. They weren't threatening. They weren't angry. They just stared as if waiting for something. Then one of them raised his hand and pointed toward the barn. That's when the light inside flickered back to life. Not the yellow lantern glow, but a sharp, unnatural white that spilled out across the dirt like a floodlight. I didn't want to go. Every part of me screamed to stay in the van, to reverse, to drive until the tank ran dry. But I couldn't shake what the voice said. Turn it off. And I knew somehow that he hadn't meant the radio. He'd meant the light. I stepped out of the van. The air hit me cold. The figures didn't move as I passed them. Their lanterns remained still, faces turned toward the barn's open door. As I got closer, I noticed that the hum had returned. Faint now, pulsing just beneath the surface of the soundscape, like the low note of a cello. The inside of the barn was blinding at first. I shielded my eyes. The light seemed to pour from the center of the floor, from the mirror. It was upright again, standing exactly where it had been the first time I saw it. But the surface wasn't glass anymore. It was liquid, perfectly still, yet glowing with that same white intensity that felt too clean, too cold. It didn't illuminate the walls, just the air, like the light existed in a space separate from the world around it. And in that light, faintly visible, were faces, dozens of them, pressed against the surface, mouths open, eyes wide, like they were screaming from inside a layer too thick to break through. My throat tightened. I took one step back, then another. But a voice stopped me. "You brought it back," came from behind me, soft, weary. I turned and saw a man standing by the doorway. He looked almost normal, except for the pale blue stains running up the sleeves of his jacket, the same color as the barn, the same color as the fog. He looked at the mirror, then at me. "They never stay gone. You bring the light out there, it finds its way home." I tried to speak, but the words caught. What is it?" He didn't answer right away, just walked closer to the mirror, the glow reflecting off his hollow features. "They kept it," he said quietly. "They thought if they could trap it, they could stop it from spreading. But light doesn't stay where you tell it to. It remembers faces. It remembers the ones who looked too long." He turned his head toward me, and in the reflection I saw what he really looked like. His skin wasn't skin. It shimmered, translucent like the surface of that mirror. His eyes were hollow, glowing faintly from within, and then the light in the mirror began to move. It rippled outward like a drop of water hitting a still pond. Each ripple made the hum stronger. The ground beneath my feet began to tremble. The air vibrated with static. He reached toward it, and for a second I thought he meant to touch it. But instead, he pressed his hand flat against the surface, and the light pulled him in. Slow, silent, his body folding into the mirror like he'd been made of smoke. When he disappeared completely, the hum stopped. The light flickered once, then dimmed to almost nothing. All that was left was my reflection, and behind me, empty air. I stepped back, shaking. Every nerve in my body screamed to leave, but I couldn't move. My reflection stared back at me, motionless. But then it blinked. I hadn't. My pulse hammered in my ears as the reflection slowly raised its hand and pressed it against the glass from the other side. My own hand stayed still. It wasn't copying me anymore. It was moving first. And then I realized something horrifying. It wasn't just me in the reflection anymore. There were others, faint outlines, dozens of faces layered behind mine, each one looking straight ahead. Some I didn't recognize, but a few looked like the figures outside. I ran. I tore out of the barn, heart slamming against my ribs, the sunlight breaking through the fog in fractured beams. The van's door slammed behind me as I threw myself inside, turned the key, and hit the gas. Gravel flew behind the tires as the road opened up again, as if it had never been lost. The hum faded with distance. The fog began to thin. By the time I reached the main highway, the sky was clear, a pale, brilliant blue. My hands shook so hard I had to pull over. For a long while, I just sat there, staring at the barn fading behind me in the rearview mirror. But before I drove off for good, I noticed something strange. The inside of my van, the walls, the dashboard, even the seats, all had a faint blue tint, like the color had seeped in through the metal itself. And on the inside of the windshield, right where my reflection had been, there was a single perfect handprint. Not pressed from the outside, from within. It's been weeks since that night. I've driven hundreds of miles, camped in different states, tried to forget. But every time I stop somewhere quiet, every time I kill the engine and sit still long enough to listen, I can hear it. That low hum. It's faint now, buried beneath the sounds of the world. But it's there. And sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I see a glow against the curtains. Soft. Blue. Maybe the man was right. Maybe the light doesn't stay where you tell it to. Maybe once you've seen it, once you've kept it, it keeps you too. And as I sit here, parked under a wide, empty sky, I can't shake the thought that somewhere out there, back behind that blue barn, another traveler has already found it again. Maybe they'll turn it off, or maybe they'll keep the light. My name's Aaron Whitfield. I'm 34, a carpenter by trade, and when I'm not working, I drive my old Volkswagen Westfalia through the back roads of the American West, usually alone. It's a 1978 model, the kind of van that hums when it idles, like an animal breathing slow and steady in the dark. I've always liked that. The sound made me feel less alone. That fall, I took a trip through Nevada and into the high desert near the Utah border. Barely any towns, barely any service. Just sand, sagebrush, and the low hum of my van rolling across the cracked asphalt. I was chasing quiet, or maybe trying to outrun something louder. A breakup, a job that had hollowed me out, a restlessness I couldn't shake. Camping was supposed to be the cure. Out there, the world thinned into something simple. The first few nights were easy. I parked off dirt roads near old mining routes, watched the sun collapse behind red rock cliffs, cooked instant noodles over my propane stove, and slept under stars so bright they made the sky feel heavy. But on the fourth night, somewhere near the Bonneville Salt Flats, the quiet started to change. It wasn't sudden. It was like the silence thickened. I'd rolled into a flat basin off a forgotten service road and parked near a dry lake bed. The air smelled metallic, like ozone before lightning. I thought it was from the storm that had passed earlier that afternoon. I set up camp, unfolded the little table in the van, and wrote in my journal about how the desert always felt like a test, like it watched you more than you watched it. When night fell, the wind dropped completely. The van's windows fogged from my breath. I turned off the lights and sat in the driver's seat, listening. You could hear things move miles away out there, the sand shifting, a coyote's call stretching thin across the basin. But what I heard wasn't animal. It was softer, a steady knocking, somewhere in the dark. Tap, tap, tap. I turned on the cabin light. It stopped. I waited, gripping the steering wheel like it could anchor me. Then it started again, this time closer, like knuckles against metal. My first thought was rocks. The wind, maybe, or sand hitting the body panels. But when I stepped outside, there was no wind. The air hung still as glass. I walked around the van with my flashlight. The beam cut across the salt flats, wide and white and empty. Nothing but my own footprints leading away from the tires. No rocks, no tracks, no animals. Just the van, humming faintly as it cooled. Back inside, I shut the door and locked it, trying to laugh it off. It's just the van cooling, I told myself. Old metal, old sounds. But the moment I lay down on the bench seat, the knocking came again, this time under me. It was subtle at first, like a coin dropping on the floorboards. Then it grew rhythmic. Tap, 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 like something testing the wood. I sat up fast, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the small metal vent near the base of the bench. The sound came from there. I pressed my ear to it. The tapping stopped. Then, faintly, from under the van came something else. A drag. A long, slow scrape, like fabric against gravel. I didn't move for a minute. I just listened. The scrape circled the van once, then stopped by the sliding door. My breath fogged the window as I leaned forward. Nothing. Darkness. The next sound wasn't a scrape or a knock. It was breathing. Wet, shallow breathing from just outside the door. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with the dome light on until dawn, engine key ready in my hand. When the horizon finally turned pale orange, I jumped out and looked beneath the van. Nothing. No footprints, no drag marks, not even disturbed dust. Just the wide, untouched salt. It should have ended there. It didn't. That morning, I decided to keep driving. The desert's like that. You either face it or you leave fast. I headed east toward the Utah line, promising myself I'd find a real campground with people, but the feeling followed me. I couldn't shake the sense that something had taken interest in me the night before, something patient. When I stopped at a small gas station in Wendover, the attendant asked where I'd camped. I told him somewhere near a dry lake west of town. His face changed. He said that stretch of road hadn't been used in decades. "You sure you didn't see the old trailers?" he asked. "What trailers?" He didn't answer right away. He just pointed toward the mountains. Used to be a salt harvesting site back there. Workers lived out in RVs and vans. Storm wiped them out in the 70s. Folks say you can still hear them knocking to get out when the wind's calm. I laughed it off, but it didn't feel like a joke. That night, I didn't find the crowded campground I'd promised myself. I ended up pulling into another empty turnout, this time near a canyon wall that rose black and sharp against the moon. The stillness made the world feel hollow, like sound had nowhere to go. I tried to sleep, but at exactly 1:17 a.m., the knocking came again. Only this time it wasn't under me, it was inside. It started at the back hatch, soft, irregular, like someone trying to find the right rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. I sat up slowly. My sleeping bag rustled loud in the silence. I looked toward the rear of the van, where the moonlight cut through the curtains in thin blue lines. The knocking paused, then moved, this time to the side panel, then closer. By the vent again. Something inside me shifted. Fear, yes, but also curiosity. That dangerous kind of curiosity that makes you lean closer instead of running. I crawled toward the back and pressed my palm against the metal wall. It was cold. Too cold for desert air. The tapping stopped. I held my breath. For a few seconds, all I heard was my heartbeat. Then, from somewhere near the floor, a single whisper pushed through the vent, low, dragging like air through wet fabric. "Help?" It wasn't loud, it wasn't clear, but it was human. I jumped back and hit my head on the cabinet. The sound didn't repeat, but something else did. A smell. Damp, metallic, like old rain and iron. It seeped through the vent, coating the air inside the van. I scrambled to open a window, but the latch jammed. My fingers slipped on the cold metal. When I finally cracked it, no air came in, just that same smell, thicker, closer. I grabbed my flashlight and yanked open the side door. The desert was still. My light barely reached the canyon wall. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a shimmer like heat distortion, but it was too dark to tell. Then the flashlight flickered. The batteries were new. I'd replaced them that morning, but the beam stuttered and dimmed, then went out entirely. The hum of the van's interior light followed. Everything died. Light, sound, even the gentle mechanical whir I'd grown used to. The van went dead quiet. That's when I heard footsteps in the dust. They weren't heavy, just slow. Careful. Coming from behind the van, I turned, holding the dead flashlight like a weapon. The steps stopped when I faced that direction. Then in the silence, a voice, not a whisper this time, but a calm, distant tone, came from outside. "You left your door open." I froze. The door I'd come out from was still wide open. The moonlight spilled onto the salt, but I couldn't see anyone. "Who's there?" I said. My voice cracked on the last word. No reply, only the creak of metal as if someone leaned against the van. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and jumped into the driver's seat. The key wouldn't turn. The ignition was dead. The dashboard lights were black. Outside, the knocking began again. Not in one spot this time, all around. The roof, the panels, even the windows. It was chaos. Dozens of small taps, frantic and uneven like fingers drumming to be let in. I screamed and slammed my hand against the horn. It made no sound. Nothing worked. Then, all at once, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. My breath came out in shallow bursts, fogging the glass. I sat there for minutes, maybe hours, waiting for morning. When dawn finally came, the van started on the first try as if nothing had happened. I drove until I saw another car, some tourist heading west. I pulled over, rolled down the window, and asked, "Did you hear anything last night?" He shook his head. Quietest night I've ever had. He didn't notice the salt handprint smeared on my window. I didn't notice the one on the inside. I didn't drive far before I had to pull over. My hands were shaking too hard to hold the steering wheel steady, and my throat felt dry like I'd been breathing dust for hours. The highway stretched in a dead line through the basin, salt white and glittering beneath the rising sun. I parked on the shoulder, got out, and walked a few steps away from the van, trying to shake it off, trying to breathe. But every time I closed my eyes, I heard that whisper again, that single word, Help. The morning light made everything look harmless. My Volkswagen looked old but friendly again, like it had before any of this started. The kind of vehicle that belonged to road trips and freedom, not whatever last night had been. Still, I couldn't bring myself to open the back hatch. I didn't want to see the vent, didn't want to see that handprint. When I finally forced myself to check, the interior smelled faintly of rust and damp air. The kind of smell you get near a dried-out riverbed. The handprint was there, just where I remembered it, inside the glass, fingers pointing inward, pressed from my side. The salt had caked into the creases of the glass like fingerprints frozen in time. That should have been impossible. I wiped it away with my sleeve, but even when it was gone, I could still see the outline like an afterimage burned into my mind. I turned the ignition and kept driving east, promising myself I'd reach a real town by nightfall, somewhere with streetlights, somewhere with sound. By noon, I made it to a small town called Baker, right at the Nevada-Utah border. Population maybe 60, if you count the dogs. There was a diner, a motel, and a mechanic's garage. I went straight to the diner, hoping to lose myself in noise, coffee mugs, clinking, conversation, anything human. The waitress poured my coffee without a word, then gave me a strange look. "You been out by the flats?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "Storm season," she said, almost to herself. "Sometimes they rise back up when the air gets too still." "Who?" I asked. She blinked like she hadn't realized she'd said it out loud. "Never mind, Han. You just look tired." I wanted to tell her everything, the knocking, the whisper, the smell, but I stopped. There was something in her tone that told me she already knew, or maybe didn't want to. I left a few bills on the counter and headed to the garage next door. The mechanic, an older man with skin like cracked leather, ran his hands along the van's undercarriage and frowned. "You've been driving through salt for too long. Look at this buildup. You hear any knocking?" I froze. "Yeah," I said. "Last night." He grunted. "Ain't the first time someone said that. Folks leave their rigs out there too long, they come back different. Sometimes the sound's the frame expanding, sometimes it's just..." He trailed off, wiping his hands on a rag. "You stay out past midnight?" I nodded again. He stared at me for a long moment before saying quietly, "Next time, don't." That night, I couldn't bring myself to drive any farther. I checked into the tiny motel on the edge of town, left the van parked under the only working streetlight, and drew the curtains tight. I thought I'd finally sleep, but sometime after midnight, I woke to a sound I recognized immediately. Tap, 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 not on the window, not on the door, on the ceiling. I sat up fast. The clock on the nightstand read 1:17 a.m., the same time as before. The sound grew louder, spreading, like someone crawling slowly across the roof. I turned on the lamp. The light flickered once, then went out. That metallic smell crept back into the room. Damp, electric, faintly human. I grabbed my phone. No service. No signal at all. I opened the door, heart hammering, and stepped into the parking lot. The streetlight above my van flickered like a dying candle. The other lights were dark, and beneath that one trembling bulb, I saw movement. Something stood behind my van. Its shape was wrong. Too thin, too long, like a man stretched by heat distortion. I couldn't see a face, only the outline against the pale Volkswagen. It tilted its head, almost curious, and then it lifted its hand, pressed it against the back window. When it pulled away, the print was there again, the same salt outline. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't grab my bag. I just bolted into the night, past the diner, past the empty gas station, until the sound of my own footsteps drowned everything else. I ended up crouched behind a fence on the far side of town, lungs burning, shaking. When I finally dared to look back, the streetlight was steady again. The figure was gone. The next morning, I found the van right where I'd left it. No footprints, no marks, not even the handprint, like nothing had ever happened. But the air inside the cabin was ice cold, even under the desert sun. That's when I realized I couldn't leave it behind. The van, I mean, something had followed me inside it, or maybe I had followed it. Either way, we were connected now. So I kept driving. It's been 6 months since that night in Baker. I've driven through 5 states, parked beside lakes, forests, and mountains. The van runs fine, better than it ever did before. But sometimes, when I stop for gas or camp alone for too long, I hear it again. Tap, tap, tap. Always at 1:17 a.m. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. I told myself it was trauma or exhaustion or the desert still echoing in my head. But I started noticing something strange. Every place I camped, something nearby was always gone. A tent left behind, a campfire still smoking, a car door left open, as if someone had just walked away and never come back. Sometimes I think whatever was trapped beneath that van, beneath the salt, didn't just follow me. It's looking for others now. One night, parked by a lake in Idaho, I left my phone recording while I slept. When I played it back the next morning, there was a long silence, then that familiar knocking. After that came a faint voice. Not mine, not quite human. You shouldn't have left me there. I deleted the recording. I told myself I imagined it. But a week later, in Oregon, a park ranger stopped by my site. He said he'd gotten reports of strange sounds echoing through the woods. Like what? I asked. He looked at my van, eyes narrowing. Like knocking. Now, wherever I go, I see my reflection in the glass at night and wonder if it's still me. The condensation fogs the window, and sometimes I swear I see a handprint form on the inside before I touch it. I've stopped sleeping through the night. The knocking never lasts long, but it's always enough to remind me that something woke up out there in the salt, and it didn't go back to sleep. Still, I keep driving. Maybe because I'm too scared to stop. Or maybe because I'm beginning to understand something I didn't before. When you camp alone long enough, when the silence starts to hum like a voice, the real horror isn't what's outside the van. It's realizing that some parts of you want to open the door. So if you ever find yourself driving through Nevada at night and you see an old yellow Volkswagen parked near the salt flats, keep going. Don't stop to look inside. Don't knock on the glass. Because if you do, you might hear someone knock back, and it won't be me anymore. I never thought silence could feel alive until I camped deep in the Appalachian woods. There's something about that place, something ancient that sits beneath the surface, like the ground remembers things the trees don't want to say out loud. I'd driven my old Volkswagen Westphalia through those mountains a dozen times before, usually sticking to the main campgrounds near the Blue Ridge Parkway. But this time, I wanted solitude. I wanted quiet. I wanted to disconnect from everything and just breathe for a while. My name's Eli. I'm 34, a mechanical designer from Ohio. I'd been sleeping in my VW van for weeks, coasting between small mountain towns, picking up freelance work wherever I could find a signal. That van had become more than just a home on wheels. It was my way of rebuilding after the divorce, after the noise of life had turned into a kind of static that I couldn't escape from. I told myself this trip would be healing. I didn't realize how right I was, but not in the way I hoped. I found the spot by accident, turning off a forest road that barely showed up on the map. The trees there grew close together, old-growth hardwoods with trunks wide as boulders. The air smelled like wet moss and iron. It was late afternoon when I parked. The sun slanted through the leaves in golden strips, and the forest hummed in that slow, steady way that feels like it's breathing. The campground wasn't official. No picnic tables, no cleared fire rings. Just a sloping patch of ground that looked like it had once been used by someone else long ago. There were a few flattened spots in the grass, the kind that come from tents sitting too long, and in the dirt near the base of a fallen oak, I noticed something strange. A half-buried circle of stones. At first, I thought it was just an old campfire ring, but the stones were placed too precisely, evenly spaced, each one marked with blackened streaks that didn't look like soot. I crouched, brushing away a layer of leaves, and found a small metal clasp buried in the soil, a piece of something once leather-bound, maybe a strap. I didn't think much of it. Appalachia is full of remnants like that. People have been disappearing and reappearing in these mountains since long before highways ever reached them. That night, I set up my small fire, heated some canned chili on the propane stove, and leaned back against the van, just listening. You don't realize how mechanical your life sounds until you sit somewhere that's completely free of hums or clicks. No distant cars, no AC compressors, just the layered sounds of night insects and the slow, soft shifting of trees. Then I noticed it, the rhythm. It was subtle at first, a faint tapping, not like woodpeckers, not random. It came in threes. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. Then again. Tap, tap, tap. Always three. It came from somewhere deeper in the woods, far enough away that I couldn't see anything when I pointed my flashlight toward the sound. I told myself it was just some animal activity, maybe a deer moving through brush or branches falling. But the spacing of the taps stayed consistent, deliberate. Around midnight, the tapping stopped. That's when the smell hit, like wet clay mixed with something sweet, almost metallic. I thought maybe something had died nearby, but the odor was faint and kept shifting, like it was moving with the wind. I slept with the van's door cracked open, the soft sound of crickets pulling me into a half-dreaming state. At some point in the night, I woke to another sound, so soft I thought I'd imagined it. A low murmur. Words, maybe, carried by the wind. The forest was black outside, my flashlight beam dissolving in fog that hadn't been there before. I remember lying there, holding my breath, feeling the weight of something unspoken pressing through the silence. When I woke the next morning, everything looked different. The fog was still there, hanging low, and the forest felt rearranged. My fire pit was scattered. The circle of stones I'd found the day before, gone. Every rock, every trace, vanished like it had never existed. The air was colder too, even though the forecast had called for mild weather. My van's windshield had tiny hand-shaped smears, like someone had pressed against it with damp fingers. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself condensation can make weird shapes. But deep down, I felt that first quiet shiver of unease, the kind that makes you start listening to the silence instead of ignoring it. I decided to hike down toward the creek I'd seen on the map. It wasn't far, maybe half a mile through thick brush. The ground was spongy, covered in a layer of decaying leaves that made every step sound heavier than it should have. Birds didn't call much there. Even the insects sounded subdued. The creek was narrow but fast-moving, its surface broken by pale stones slick with moss. And there, on the far bank, I saw it. Another circle. Stones, perfectly placed. In the center, something wooden, like a carving, stood half buried in the mud. I crossed carefully, slipping once on a wet rock, and when I reached the circle, I realized the carving wasn't wood. It was bone. A vertebra, maybe from a deer or something larger, drilled through the center and tied with a piece of old rope. The rope was rotted, but the bone looked clean. Too clean, like it had been recently scrubbed. I felt my stomach twist. I don't know why, but I whispered an apology under my breath, like I'd intruded on something private. That's when I heard the tapping again. 3 beats. Closer this time. I turned, scanning the trees. Nothing, just fog and the muted sound of water. But the feeling, like being watched, was immediate and heavy. My breath clouded in front of me, and the tapping repeated again, this time from behind. I ran. I don't even remember how I crossed back over the creek without falling. By the time I reached my van, the fog had thickened into a pale wall. I started the engine and sat there, staring at the tree line, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. By mid-afternoon, I convinced myself I'd just been spooked. I told myself maybe some other camper had set up those circles for some kind of ritual or local art project. Appalachia has its share of odd folk traditions. I even laughed a little as I made coffee, but the laughter felt forced. That night, I decided to sleep inside the van with the doors locked. The fog rolled back in around sunset, thick and heavy like the sky had lowered itself onto the earth. When I turned off the lights, I could see shapes shifting in the mist, maybe branches, maybe shadows. I told myself not to look too long. Sometime past midnight, something brushed against the side of the van, just a soft scrape. Then again, slower this time. My breath hitched and I froze, listening. The tapping began once more. Tap, tap, tap. But this time it came from directly behind the van. I didn't move. Every nerve in my body tightened like I was holding my breath inside my own bones. The tapping came again. 3 sharp beats, the rhythm perfect and patient. Then nothing. Just the sound of the forest breathing outside my thin metal shell. I reached toward the flashlight on the small shelf by the stove, careful not to make the van creak. My hand shook so badly that when I clicked it on, the beam trembled across the fogged windows. Nothing there. Just my own reflection staring back at me, pale and wide-eyed. But then, on the driver's side window, I saw it. A smear. Fresh. Like a finger had traced downward through the condensation just moments ago. My chest clenched. I forced myself to inch toward the front seat, crouching low, keeping my light angled away. The night outside was dense, fog swallowing the edges of my headlights like cotton. I remember whispering something like, "You're just tired, Eli. You're just tired." The van groaned when I shifted my weight, and the sound seemed to echo far too long. Then the tapping started again, but this time from the roof. 3 slow knocks. It was soft enough that someone outside could have used a stick. Deliberate. Not heavy. Not violent. But the timing was too human. I wanted to start the engine, but my keys were in the ignition, and that meant turning them would make noise. I couldn't even convince my hand to move that far. I sat there in the dark, flashlight pointed at my knees, trying to listen past my heartbeat. The tapping stopped. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Nothing. Then came the whisper. Not words, just that soft rush of breath that makes the hairs rise on your neck. It moved from one side of the van to the other, like someone dragging their palm across the metal. I snapped. I jammed the keys forward and the engine roared to life. The headlights burst through the fog, showing nothing but swirling gray. I slammed the van into reverse, nearly backing into a tree before straightening out and flooring it down the dirt road. My headlights bounced over ruts, the fog twisting through them like smoke. I didn't stop until I reached a gravel turnout miles down the road, heart still hammering, hands trembling on the steering wheel. I left the engine running for almost an hour. I told myself I'd drive straight into town at first light. But fatigue caught me in waves, and before I knew it, the adrenaline drained, leaving a hollow kind of exhaustion. I reclined the seat, locked the doors, and kept my flashlight in my hand as I drifted into uneasy sleep. I woke up to sunlight and birdsong. For a moment, everything felt normal again. The fog had lifted completely, and the air was crisp blue and clean. I stepped out to stretch, trying to convince myself the night had been nothing more than nerves, too many ghost stories, and too much isolation. But as I walked around the van, my stomach dropped. Across the rear window, written in streaks of mud and condensation, were 3 words, "Don't dig here." They weren't deep marks, just finger-drawn lines smeared on the glass. But the message was clear, and it hadn't been there the day before. I scanned the ground around the turnout. Nothing. No footprints, no tire tracks, just gravel and dew. I should have left then. Every instinct screamed at me to drive straight down the mountain, but something about those words, it felt personal, like someone knew I'd found that circle by the creek. I couldn't shake it. I thought maybe there was a logical explanation, a hiker, a prank, maybe even a warning about something real like sinkholes or old mines. Appalachia's full of them. So against every rational part of me, I drove back. The fog hadn't returned yet, but the road felt different now. Narrower somehow, the trees closing in tighter. My hands gripped the wheel harder the closer I got. When I reached the clearing, everything looked untouched. No footprints, no signs of anyone. The forest floor seemed to have swallowed my fire pit completely. I parked and stepped out, the silence pressing against my ears like a weight. I walked back toward the creek, following the faint impressions of my own steps from the day before. The air smelled sharper this time, like rain and something faintly metallic, almost like iron again. The creek was louder, swollen from a storm I hadn't noticed overnight. When I reached the far bank, I froze. The circle was back. Perfect again. Stones clean and evenly spaced, like someone had rebuilt it in my absence. But this time the bone wasn't in the center. Instead, there was something else, a small, rusted tin box, half buried in mud. I stared at it for a long time, heart pounding. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't leave it either. Curiosity has its own gravity. I used a stick to nudge it free, brushing away dirt until the lid popped open with a soft metallic click. Inside were photographs. They were old, faded, edges curled. 5 or 6 of them, all black and white. The first showed a group of people standing by a Volkswagen van almost identical to mine, only much older. The trees in the background looked the same, Appalachian ridge lines. The second photo showed the same group at night, sitting around a fire. The third made my blood run cold. It showed the same clearing, same circle of stones, but this time the people were standing in it, holding hands, their faces turned upward. Something tall and thin stood at the edge of the frame. At first I thought it was a tree, but the more I looked, the less it resembled anything natural. It was too straight, too dark, and there was a faint outline of what might have been arms. I dropped the photos back into the box and stumbled backward. My foot caught on a root and I fell hard, scraping my elbow. That's when I heard the tapping again. Tap, 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 from the trees directly behind me. I spun, searching the dense shadows. For a split second, I thought I saw movement, a shape sliding between the trunks. Not running, gliding. It stopped just beyond the fog line, where the light couldn't reach. Something inside me broke then. I turned and ran. I don't remember the drive back down the mountain, just the way the road twisted endlessly and how the fog seemed to chase me until I hit the highway. I didn't stop until I reached a small diner outside Boone. I sat there for hours, staring into my coffee, hands shaking too much to eat. I told myself I'd throw the tin box away, but when I checked the van later, it was gone. That night, parked in a motel lot, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside felt amplified. The distant hum of passing trucks, the whistle of wind under the eaves. Around 2 a.m, I heard the tapping again. 3 slow knocks. But this time, they came from inside the van. I opened the curtains slowly, flashlight in hand, and saw the faintest smear on the inside of the windshield. A handprint. Smaller than mine. I froze there, staring at that print. The fingers were long, pressed shallowly into the fogged glass, like someone had leaned in close from the passenger side and whispered something I couldn't hear. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The parking lot light outside threw pale orange lines across the van's dashboard, cutting the dark into thin slices. For a moment, it almost looked like someone was sitting in the seat beside me, a shape, faint and shifting, there and gone as fast as I blinked. I sat back slowly, gripping the flashlight until my knuckles ached. The smell was there again, the same metallic sweetness from the forest. I could taste it now, sharp on the back of my tongue. I reached for the door handle, but before I touched it, something knocked once against the glass. Not 3 times, just once. A single heavy knock, as if to say, "I know you're awake." That was all it took. I bolted from the van, barefoot, keys clutched tight, sprinting across the motel parking lot toward the office. The clerk looked up from his phone when I burst in, half expecting me to collapse. I tried to explain, but the words tangled. I told him someone was in my van, that there'd been tapping all night. He went out with me, a flashlight in one hand, that cautious look people get when they're not sure if they should believe you. When we reached the van, it was empty. Nothing inside but the stale smell of damp fabric. The handprint was still on the glass, though fainter now. The clerk frowned, wiped it with his sleeve. "Condensation," he said. "This mountain air'll mess with your head if you're not used to it." I nodded, even though I knew he was wrong. I could still feel the warmth where I'd seen that print. The air had gone cold again, unnaturally fast. The kind of cold that comes from the inside, not the weather. I didn't stay the night. I drove until morning, the road climbing and falling in long, winding arcs through the hills. The farther I went, the lighter the air felt. But I couldn't shake that sense of being followed, not by something behind me on the road, but by a thought that wouldn't leave my chest. Something about that message, "Don't dig here." It wasn't just a warning. It felt like guilt. 2 days later, I stopped in a small town called Silva. There was an old county archive near the square, a quiet little building with a handwritten sign that said Historical Society. I don't even know what I was hoping to find there. Maybe proof that what I saw had roots, that there was history to it, something rational. The woman behind the desk was gray-haired, polite, curious about my van. She told me her husband used to have one, back when folks still trusted the woods. When I mentioned the spot off the forest road, her face changed. Subtle at first, then sharper. She asked me to describe it. When I mentioned the creek and the circles, her hands froze on the desk. She told me there'd been a group out there in the 1970s, college kids from Asheville, supposedly studying Appalachian folklore and rituals. They camped deep in those woods, near where I'd been. One night, locals heard gunshots echoing down the valley. When the sheriff went to check, he found the camp abandoned, fire still burning, belongings scattered. No bodies. Just circles of stones and bones arranged like offerings. The only thing left behind was their van. I asked what kind of van. She looked at me for a long moment before answering, Volkswagen, like yours. Something inside me went cold. She told me locals still won't camp there, said hikers sometimes find things, tied bones, carved symbols, things buried shallow under roots. They call it the hollow ground. Some folks say the group was trying to resurrect something old. Others think they found it. When I told her about the tapping, she just shook her head slowly. If you hear 3 knocks, she said, you leave the woods. That's not an animal. That's an asking. I didn't stay in Silva long. I drove south that same afternoon, but every mile felt heavier, like the air was pushing back. That night, I camped in a small rest area, trying to convince myself I was finally free of that place. But sleep didn't come easy. Around midnight, I dreamed of fog rolling through my van again. In the dream, I could hear the tapping, but this time it came from underneath, echoing through the floor. Tap, 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 tap. When I woke, my van was still, but the sound lingered in my head, syncing with my heartbeat. I stepped outside, breathing hard. The rest area lights buzzed overhead, the asphalt cold beneath my feet. That's when I noticed the dirt clinging to my socks, dark, wet, and red-brown like the soil by that creek. I hadn't stepped anywhere near mud in days. I stood there for a long trying to make sense of it until I realized something else. Beneath the van, near the rear tire, the gravel was disturbed, like someone had dug and filled it back in while I slept. I drove again. I don't even know where I was going at that point, maybe just away. The road curved endlessly through the mountains, every turn a mirror of the last. It felt like the forest refused to let me go. The fog returned by evening, thick enough that my headlights became useless beams of light trapped in milk. I pulled over on a narrow shoulder, too tired to keep driving. I told myself I'd rest for an hour and then continue. But as soon as I closed my eyes, the tapping started again. 3 soft knocks, right behind my head. I turned slowly, the world narrowing to a pinpoint. The back window was fogged again, but I could see a faint outline through it, something tall and thin standing just beyond the glass. My breath caught in my throat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. Then, slowly, it raised one long hand and pressed it against the window. I could see the shape of each finger, pale and wrong. Then it leaned closer. I didn't wait. I slammed the gear into drive, tires spinning gravel, the engine screaming as I tore down the road. My chest was tight, vision blurred by tears and fog. I don't remember how long I drove, but when I finally stopped, the sky had gone gray with morning. The fog had lifted, and I found myself at a ridge overlook I didn't remember passing before. I stepped out, shaking. The view stretched endlessly, mountains layered like waves, valleys still sleeping under a low mist. It should have been beautiful. It was beautiful. But standing there, I felt a different kind of fear, the quiet kind that settles deep in your bones and never fully leaves. I looked back at the van. My old Volkswagen, the thing I thought would carry me toward freedom, now felt like a cage that remembered. The back window still bore faint traces of that handprint, as if it had burned itself into the glass. I drove home that day, sold the van a month later, told the buyer it had some quirks, that it didn't idle well in damp weather. I didn't mention the fog, or the smell, or the sound that sometimes came at night when the world went completely still. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I still hear it faintly in my head. Tap, tap, tap. Not loud, just enough to remind me. Some places in the mountains aren't meant to be found. Some things buried aren't meant to be unearthed, and when the fog drifts low enough to touch the trees, when the air smells like rain and iron, I can almost hear the forest breathing again, steady, patient, waiting for me to come back. I think about that trip more often than I should. It's been years, but it still feels close, like the air from those mountains never fully left my lungs. For a long time, I tried to forget it. I told myself it was exhaustion, isolation, maybe some trick of the fog, or my mind unraveling under too much silence. But deep down, I know that wasn't the whole truth. There are things in those woods that don't fit in our world neatly. Things that wait, patient, and unbothered by whether or not we believe in them. And yet, what scares me most isn't what I saw. It's what it showed me about myself. How easily I ignored instinct, how quickly I turned reason into denial, how deep I was willing to go just to prove I wasn't afraid. I think that's why so many people lose themselves out there, not because something takes them, but because they don't listen when the forest starts whispering. They think they're stronger than the silence. When I remember those nights, the smell of the fog, the rhythm of that tapping, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel humility. There's a lesson in that kind of fear, the kind that strips away ego, leaving only your pulse and breath and the truth that you are small. Small in the face of something vast and ancient that doesn't need your understanding to exist. The mountains taught me that there's beauty in being small. That not everything is meant to be mapped or fixed or owned. Some things are meant to be respected. And maybe that's what I'd forgotten before that trip, that when you wander too far into places, you're not just exploring, you're entering someone else's story. These days, I still drive, still camp, but never that deep into the hills. When fog rises through the trees, I stop and listen. Not out of fear, but out of gratitude for being reminded once that the world isn't all asphalt and Wi-Fi, that there are places still untouched, still mysterious. Sometimes at night, when the wind hits just right, I hear soft knocking somewhere in the distance. It's never close, never threatening, just there, like an echo that found me no matter how far I've gone. And maybe that's all right. Maybe it's the forest's way of reminding me that everything we unearth has its price. Because fear isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's a teacher. Sometimes it's the only thing honest enough to keep you alive. So when you camp next, when the fire burns low and the woods go quiet, listen. Listen to the silence pressing in. Listen to what it's saying beneath the hum of night. If you ever hear 3 knocks, don't ask what they mean. Just nod. Pack up, leave the ground undisturbed, and as you drive away with fog in your mirrors and your pulse still racing, remember this. Some secrets in the Appalachian forests aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to remind us that we are guests here, that the earth remembers everything, and that sometimes survival means simply knowing when not to dig.